Hey guys, so of course we've had 2 WCQs as well as a couple weekend worth of regionals now post Infinite Forbidden. So as always, I wanted to provide a tier list of the best rogue decks based on the topping information from regional and WCQ level events, as well as some data from Dueling Book. And as always, definitely go check out those discount codes for Yu-Gi-Oh! Singles as well as sleeves, links in the description below. Anyways, a few days ago I provided an overall meta tier list by the data, and this is sort of what it looked like. So for the purpose of this video, we're not going to be looking at decks that were in tier 1 or tier 2 here, except for White Forest because it was sort of on the fringe there. Let's just treat it as rogue deck for now for the purpose of this video. Alright, so let's just get to the rogue tier list by the data for this month, and as mentioned, we're just going to treat White Forest as rogue for the purpose of this video. It's really just in between tier 2 rogue, I think, and you can also check out my recent video I did where I surveyed the White Forest players, and they shared their thoughts on the key strengths and key weaknesses of this deck and much more. And so basically, one common variant of course is with like the runic stuff, and with the synergy just being able to pitch spell traps to enable their combos, but also being able to add the spell trap back. So if you can add something back like skill drain, that is pretty powerful. And they have other interactions. Let's say for example they can do like quick effects, spell trap pops on your opponent's turn, Book of Eclipse, or even make Chaos Angel on your opponent's turn. So you know what, it does have some pretty cool stuff that it can do. Again, definitely go check out that video I did, and actually keep an eye out for sleeve cheap, because they are going to have these really cool looking White Forest border sleeves, and you can use code Akuna5 for 5% off when that drops. Next up we have Spright. So this one's kind of interesting because it actually got the most recent weekend it got some multiple tops, and there were different variations. There was actually a Tri-Brigade Spright that topped, which you do see sporadically here and there. It's not that common. You also have kind of like your typical quote-unquote pure Melfi Spright, and they were all of course playing like the new Ice Barrier stuff, which is basically like just 2 cards to enable you to make Totally Awesome a little bit earlier. And then there was even a Fiendsmith version that topped. So from looking at the topping deck list, I guess they were just using it to dump Angler with Beatrice through the Fiendsmith stuff in case they don't have like Spright combo, I assume. So I think it's nice that they do still kind of stick around. Of course, they were briefly maybe in like tier 2 category just because with the Ice Barrier stuff they were a little bit popular, but really I think a lot of us kind of expected them to kind of fall back again a little bit. And then you also have Rescue Ace. So this is a deck that it was tier 1 for some time, and then the moment Snake Eye became popular, it just immediately dropped down, even though it was still a good deck the entire time, at least the way I felt it. So now it is still getting some regional tops here. They even topped the WCQ level, and now combined with Fiendsmith stuff, which they are clearly playing, it's looks pretty promising. I mean, they were even dumping something like the Turbulence itself, and then you can sort of get access to it later in the combo. So you know what, I think this entire time this deck was actually quite good. Just having a mix of monster and background interruptions is always pretty strong from my view, and so I think it's kind of coming back a little bit. And then you have Kashtira. Nothing really too much to say about this. It's just kind of been the same for the last like year, I feel like. Just being able to play Shifter, pretty consistent, pretty good going first and second. So you know what, just really solid all around. And then you have Melodious, which into this new Infinite Forbidden format definitely kind of took a step back. Obviously the last format after Legacy of Destruction, they were actually pretty solid the entire time. It wasn't just like a initial deck hype or anything. They were actually still getting multiple tops here and there throughout that format. But I would assume, for example, you have something like, let's say, Dark Ruler, Forbidden Droplet being pretty popular, and I actually did a survey video on this one a while back as well that you can check out in terms of some of the weaknesses, and those board breakers like Droplet, even Super Poly, which isn't as popular now, but Dark Ruler definitely really key, and they're also like light, so Bestials being played a lot probably hurts them as well. But you know what, picked up some regional tops recently, and it is still around at least. So next we have Magical Musket. So this one's super cool. I'm not quite sure if I'm comfortable putting this in Rogue though. I feel like it is a little better maybe just because like the Fiendsmith stuff goes so well with this, and of course it topped WCQ level in the World Playoffs. Cam Neal also did really well with this deck, but it's a column based deck. We haven't seen it basically since like 2019ish. I feel like that's the last time I actually saw it at least a decent amount of play, and even then it was at a very rogue level. But being able to plus with like the spell traps that they can play from their hand too, including like a counter trap that they have access to, and being able to plus off that is really nice. They're also Fiends, which kind of goes well, and just being able to recycle something like Magical Musket Max that you see in the photo here, really strong, and definitely lots of synergy there. And then you have Tearlaments. This did top the NAWCQ. I mentioned that in the meta tier list. It was more of a Shadal version. It wasn't playing the Fiendsmith stuff, but I mean, you can, of course. I can, as I mentioned in that video though, I can only assume with like probably increased play in Bestials is kind of like the kryptonite for Tearlaments, and even Droll is seeing a lot of play, and that actually affects Tearlaments a decent amount as well. So it's probably not the best time for Tearlaments, but they still somehow always find a way, it seems. And then Voiceless Voice, this one's of course seen a huge drop off in play recently, especially post Infinite Forbidden. It did not top at the WCQ level. Most recently though, it did pick up some regional level tops. And again, we were talking about the increased play in Droll, increased play in something like Bestials, which definitely goes hard against Voiceless Voice, which I understand is part of the reason why I saw this drastic decline in play. At the same time, I'd like to think maybe it's still a combination of something what you saw with like Rescues, for example, in the last few months, where it was a good deck, it just wasn't seeing play because, well, there were just better other decks out there. And maybe you can say the same thing for Voiceless Voice. I still think it's quite solid, but again, there's just so many new different options out there that maybe people just kind of left trying something else. And then you have Mimigul. I don't think this has really changed top information wise since the last time I did the overall meta tier list. Again, as I mentioned in that video, I think it's really cool. I think it was supposed to be a board game based archetype or something of that sort. The one that did top was like a Kashtira version, but I also mentioned the meta tier list, the ones I've been seeing on at least replay wise, I was seeing like more kind of hand loop version. So I guess there's like multiple variations to play it, but hopefully we still see this stick around and not just kind of like that initial deck hype that we kind of see often in this game. So next we have Purrely, and the one that topped the WCQ level was actually Fiendsmith Purrely. And I remember leading into Infinite Forbidden format, Pack had made like a tier list video where he was saying like, hey, maybe Purrely can play with Fiendsmith stuff and max out on Lori because you're discarding off your quick plays and then you can sort of start your Fiendsmith combo that way. And that's exactly what this list was actually. It was playing 3 Loris, and so it was actually also playing an Angler and like double Nimble Beavers, and they weren't playing Spright stuff though, which of course Purrely and Spright have gone together in the past at times, but more so I guess I would assume just bring out multiple bodies with like Beaver. They were playing IP, they can bring that out as well. So you know what, with like the Fiendsmith stuff, at least there's some more options. Obviously you probably cut back on a little bit on the consistency of like the Purrely stuff, like actually hitting when you're like milling like top 3 for example, but nonetheless, hey, they're at least still hanging around. Next, moving on, we have Vanquish Soul. Technically, this is more like Snake Eye Fire King Vanquish Soul. That's the one that topped the, I believe, NAWCQ was like a 60 card list, so it's really cool. Not quite the pure Vanquish Soul that maybe some of you would have been hoping, but you know what, at least in terms of pure, it is a shifter deck, so at least there's some hope for you there. And of course, it did top the WCQ. I would like to put it higher, but just in terms of scoring, I guess just at least overall online as well, it's not seeing that much play either, so unfortunately didn't score as high. So next we have Thunder. Speaking of shifter decks, that's one of the better ones, but realistically nothing too much has changed for Thunder, I feel like, from its own deck list standpoint in the last little while, so nothing too much to say there. Has not topped at WCQ level, but at least regional level wise, I think it is always going to be around. Then you have Hero, so it actually recently topped one of the regionals as well, and it does top here and there like once every format essentially, from at least the times that I've been doing these breakdowns. And so I think being able to bring out something like Darklaw, that's a macro Cosmos kind of like effect, is of course very strong right now against something like Snake Eye and any kind of Fiendsmith variants, right? Although we talked about like big play of Bestials, which is obviously very strong against Hero. Even play of Droll can also be quite detrimental as well, although maybe not as much as it once used to be, but nonetheless I think at least as a rogue option, Hero has been one of the more consistent ones out there. So next we have Drytron, which is of course another very rogue deck that actually happened to top this past weekend. So it's funny, in Infinite Forbidden, Drytron actually got new support, and I feel like for players, a lot of players including myself, I feel like that was kind of swept under the rug because we were so focused on the Fiendsmith stuff and like even let's say Purrely after Infinite Forbidden that we just kind of forgot about Drytron. So this topping list was playing some of the newer cards. It basically got a new smaller guy that can special out for free, and then another kind of bigger boss monster that serve as monster negate interruptions. It was still playing Vanity's Ruler in the side. That's been kind of one of its main win cons for quite some time. Not gonna lie, Drytron, I've never been a huge fan of this deck, just because since it's like tier 1 days, being able to have, let's say, something like Herald of Perfection, and then or let's say Vanity's Ruler, they once eventually moved on to like a turn skip version. At that point they were kind of a rogue deck though, so its win con has never been the most fun to play against, but nonetheless I guess it's pretty popular rogue choice right now. Even on Dueling Book, it's actually decently popular. The only thing is we talked about Bestials, we talked about Drytron, both of which are very impactful against Drytron, so probably not the best time for them, but nonetheless at least they got some support. And then you have Salamangreat. I mean, realistically, I think this deck deserves to be higher than some of the decks listed in this same tier, but I think you just have to give it a bit more time for it to just rack up some events. We only had a couple weekend worth of regionals after all, and even then, we didn't actually have as many regional level events as we have typically done so in the past couple months. So, you know what? It's still solid. It has a lot of generic fire support at its will, and so I think you just have to give it a little bit more time. I'm sure it'll climb up the ranks as it has been doing pretty well in the last few months, and obviously it's like a fire deck. It doesn't care about something like Bestials as much, so I think just give it a bit more time. So next we have Chimera, which is always honestly quite popular, at least online, and now aside from, you know, you have a branded version, you have like Melodious variant, and now you even have Fiendsmith variant that you can play with, so very adaptable, which is nice. Droll, of course, has been a very big kryptonite for Chimera, which of course is quite popular right now because of Fiendsmith stuff, and so I would assume if you're playing Fiendsmith Chimera, I guess you're probably even more susceptible to Droll, but you know what, at least let's give it a bit more time for this one as well. I'm sure it will at least pick up some stuff at the regional level because it was doing pretty well just the format prior, so let's give it a bit more. So next we have Vanadium, which did top a regional level event recently, and it was actually not playing the Calamity Lock at all, which is kind of nice to see, because sometimes you were seeing this mixed with like Centurion stuff to just turbo out Calamity, which is pretty brutal, especially when combined with something like Reframing, for example. But you know what, this wasn't playing that version at all and still managed to top, so pretty impressive. But this is another deck that kind of had a very big weakness to something like Droll, so I would assume it's maybe not the best time as well. So next we have Orcus, and this was a runic version that topped, which has kind of been pretty popular, at least among the ones that did top, at least earlier in the year, because when Harpor first got unbanned, I believe in January, there was definitely that initial hype, a lot of several tops with Orcus, but since then it's definitely plummeted top-wise and representation-wise, so you know what, you're probably not going to see Orcus too much around, but in the meantime, definitely big kudos to the player that did top. So next we have Dragon Link, which of course is very weird to put it this low. I mean, at the same time, you know, we've only had a couple weekends worth of regionals since Infinite Forbidden. I think if you give it a bit more time, I'm sure Dragon Link will at least pick up some regional tops here and there. I mean, Bestials, as we talked about, this deck can play a lot of it, and it's going to be pretty handy when there's so much Fiendsmith stuff going around. Although at the same time, this deck has been also kind of weak to Droll as well, which is also pretty popular. But you can never count out on Dragon Links or dragons in general. Konami loves this archetype. There's always going to be at least indirect support that gets them playing pretty competitively, so definitely don't sleep on them. And lastly, we have Infernoid, and realistically, you could have slapped on any other rogue contenders up here, like for example, Lightsworn, let's say even Madolche. I think those were also worth mentioning. With Infernoid, I mean, they did get some new support. I believe it was Battles of Legend, and you know, it's like year of Fiend support, really, right? And so it did get some additional like draw power. It has always had some pretty interesting interactions in terms of copying their Infernoid effect, and then they have like access to, like, you know, like quick effect DD Crows or spell trap negate, monster negate, and the like. Although of course, usually when this deck did top in the last couple of months, it's usually something like a Snake Eye variant. Nothing wrong with that, of course, but just keep that in mind in terms of being able to play it competitively at least. Also, some couple notes I wanted to provide, like, let's say Pure Unchained with like Fiendsmith stuff, and then or even like Centurion. One thing though is because we haven't had many events so far post Infinite Forbidden, and without any kind of like regional level topping information for these decks so far, it's a little bit hard to do, especially with like Dueling Book data, where Unchained it's obviously being played in like, let's say like Yubel and just like other versions, and same thing can be said with Centurion being used as a small package in a lot of different decks. So it was a little bit hard to sort of map that out data wise, so that's why I did not include them for this tier list, but they do belong somewhere in here as well. Alright guys, so that was it for the Rogue tier list by the data for this month. Hopefully you found that interesting. Of course, we're all waiting for that ban list, and speaking of that, I will share the ban list prediction survey soon, so hopefully you have the chance to fill that out, and then we can kind of go over the results together in like the next couple weeks or so. But anyways, huge thanks to all of you for watching. Big thanks to my patrons and sponsors as always for the continued support, and well, take care guys.